It has finally become something that is mentioned often on the airwaves, even though it's been going on a lot longer than we've been talking about it. And for even longer still, since we've been talking about the Syrian refugees, there have been for many years refugees from Myanmar, Burmese refugees, refugees from Central Africa, and any other place where the conditions have become too violent and too unsafe for them to stay in the place that they call home. Just because it's not happening here doesn't mean it's not happening. It can be easy for us to miss or even dismiss what goes on in the world. I think one thing we struggle with is that we're dependent on the media to tell us what's going on and what to pay attention to. And often we obediently comply with what they say we should pay attention to. I think there's a subconscious sense that, if you sit down in the morning and read all the way through the Topeka Capital Journal, you might end with a sense of, now I know everything that's going on in Topeka, right? But not so here, not so in the nation, not so in the world. And of course, there's too much to cover. But it is what we're seeing today, the worst humanitarian crisis since World War II. In terms of the number of people affected, not just casualties, but the number of people affected, it is more people than the Haiti earthquake, Hurricane Katrina, and the Southeast Asian tsunami combined. Huge number of people affected. They're making their way across vast stretches of land in makeshift tents and other things. And, I can't help but think a little bit about the exodus of the Israelites, except circumstances here and what made them leave is a different animal, maybe even worse. This photo particularly captures the enormity of the problem, because in this picture you see both the huge number of people. You look at that picture and you can't fit another single individual in that street. But then along and beside them are the destroyed buildings that could have been someone's home, could have been someone's job, could have been a place they hung out and made memories, all the things that we do. It's gotten bad. We're actually told that 50% of the refugees are children. Half are children under the age of 18 who will have no home or school to go back to, and in some cases, fewer family and friends, or no family and friends to go back to. And I think it's powerful how the video tries to bring this to life by setting that not in Syria, but that was a white British girl. And I guess they did that so that we can't necessarily as easily say it's just those Muslims over there, they're always fighting with each other, without thinking about the human toll. If I haven't depressed you enough yet, thousands of them are not making it, are not surviving the journey. Thousands have died at sea, and you may have seen the story about 71 found in the back of a truck in Austria. Devastating stories, but I'm depressing you for a reason. There is a point. For two reasons. One, because there is a movement that was started by I don't know who, asking churches to at least address the Syrian refugee crisis in worship today, September 13th. But also because I want to ask today, whose problem is this? And whether it's something halfway across the world or something right in our own backyard, whose problem is it? For a long time now, these people had nowhere to go. Only recently, international pressure has made it so that countries and international governments are opening up and taking in refugees. I think the most recent word is that the United States will accept 10,000. That's a start, but not enough. We're just now starting to address this problem, but how do we start to address such problems? Well, whether it's across the world or in our backyard, it begins by making someone else's problem our problem, making someone else's concern our concern, making the decision to do that. Now, I'm going to bring you up a little bit and give you a little bit of hope because, as you may know, American Baptist Churches USA, our denomination, has historically done a lot of work with refugee resettlement. As a matter of fact, some of you sitting here may know more about it than I do if you've been in women's circles that have heard speakers on this, etc. American Baptist Churches has always been involved in this work. How many of you have been to Bethel Neighborhood Center in Kansas City? Okay, they work with a population of Burmese refugees and others, and it's denomination-wide. We've been doing this and continue to do this domestically, internationally. You remember those special offerings we take every year that, it comes around again and you might think, oh, here it is again. One great hour of sharing is what we collect in June. It's for disaster relief. Very often storms and natural disasters, but there's a portion of it that goes towards refugee resettlement. And I checked, I made a phone call. You don't have to wait till next June. If you are particularly burdened by this crisis and want to give, in case you didn't know how to give, One Great Hour of Sharing is one of the best ways to do it. You can write the check out to One Great Hour of Sharing and put refugee in the memo line. This is really one of the best ways to give. Some of the other ways that we give aid are the money is filtered through systems that are already broken and corrupt and are not equipped to handle what we send. One Great Hour of Sharing funds and the offerings that we take go very often directly to someone on the ground, Christian leader, missionary, someone like that, who has relationships with the community and who knows best how to distribute the funds. There is a way to help, even though it's halfway across the world. But sometimes we have to make someone else's problem, our concern. Now, I know how this can sound. Does anyone in here have enough problems of their own? Right? I mean, that's very often what we might think, especially those of you going through health crisis, loss of a loved one, loss of a job, whatever it may be. It takes up your time and energy. How do you do it? We don't have room on our plate. Well, when you gather enough people together, it actually doesn't take much. A lot of times we might emotionally or otherwise take on the burden of the world. Some of us do that. We emotionally take on the burden of the world and get in despair about what we cannot do. We obviously can't bear the financial burden as individuals of all of these problems. But if the consciousness of enough people is raised, something can be done. Paul is addressing this in his letter to the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians. Now, scholars actually think that this is probably his fourth letter to that church. There are other letters that Paul wrote that we don't have. And he's addressing misconceptions of previous things that he said. And you can hear it in this one. He says, "Our desire is not that others might be relieved while you are hard-pressed, but that there might be equality. At the present time, your plenty will supply what they need, so that in turn, their plenty will supply what you need." I can almost hear what people had been saying. Like, Paul, are you trying to suck us dry? Right? And Paul coming back and saying, no, just enough. And if enough of us come together and enough of us are concerned, something can be done. You know what I thought of? You remember last year at this time when we were all dumping ice water on ourselves? With the ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, ice bucket challenge. Now, I know some of you may still not know what that was. This movement on the internet where people took videos of them taking a challenge to pour ice water on their head and then donate to ALS. I think it had something to do with the cold water stiffening your body, something like the people with ALS become unable to use their body. So we were doing this last year. Now, ALS is relatively a rare disease. Not too many people have it at one given time, and there's a lot that we still don't understand about it. But all of a sudden, I didn't read about how it all started and with who, but enough people came together, a movement started, enough people were passionate enough, and the movement started, and there were critiques about the ice water and focusing on this as opposed to something else, but it illustrates that if you get enough people together, they raised way over $100 million for ALS research. Did it break your pocketbook? It didn't me. We were just part of this large movement. Once you get enough people together, we don't have to bear the burden by ourselves. The other issue we might face is that we assume, as we look at other needs, that people have the same resources that we do. I personally have been particularly troubled by the demonization of the poor that we've seen in recent years. And part of the objection out there is that there is laziness that exists. Well, of course, there's always laziness, but laziness is not unique to the poor. You can just as easily find a lazy rich person. That's a worldwide problem. Not everyone starts where we start. Not everyone has the same resources that we have. So we might hear, if we are well off and if we have a well-connected network of family and friends who can come to our aid and our own resources, we might hear a cry for help, a desperate plea, and sometimes we might say to ourselves, I take care of my own problems, why don't you take care of yours? But that assumes that we all started from the same place. The fact that we don't is what is being illustrated by Compassion International's poverty wheel, where the spokes, and I'm sorry, I know that's hard to see, the spokes represent the different factors in our lives, resources that we need, and the further towards the middle you go, the more impoverished and further out is enough. But economic, financial resources is only one of 6 spokes on their wheel of what makes someone impoverished. There are 5 others: access to health care, spiritual resources, educational resources, social resources, environmental resources. Some of us, yours truly, were born into that. We had those at our disposal before we even knew what we were doing. And so this illustrates the need to listen and carefully search what another person is facing. I like the cliche that you might have heard, that if hard work and enterprise was enough to get ahead, every woman in rural Africa would be a millionaire. There's more to it. The strong need to listen. I'm sorry, I had to include the dog. Listening deeply to what's going on in someone's life who we may not understand and which may be very unlike our own. Have you ever told someone something about something going on in your life and they give a simplistic or dismissive response and it makes you say or think to yourself, no, it's not that simple, right? Things can be more complex than we realized. Robert Lupton tells the story of a mission trip to Haiti. A church, true story, church took a mission trip to Haiti. While they were there, the group became particularly concerned about the mothers that they saw on the street. They had their infants in newspaper and dirty rags and things like that. And the group became very concerned about this, and it broke their heart for the kids, and they wanted them to have blankets. So they pulled their money together. They had brought spending money, and they said, instead of spending our money on souvenirs, we are going to pool it together and get blankets for these mothers to put their babies in. So they did, went back out, gave the blankets to all the mothers that they could find. And then the next day, they walked the same streets, and they saw those new blankets in shops being resold. And they were very angry and started to ask, why would they do this? Why would we give them something that they clearly needed, and then they take it and sell it for money? Well, someone who is native to the area finally explained to them that they sold the blankets to buy food because they didn't have food, and food was the higher priority before the blanket. Oh, they wanted to help. They had great loving intentions, but without the listening, they didn't know how to help in the best way. Here's what Paul says in Philippians. Make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but rather in humility, catch this part, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. Do we realize how countercultural that verse is? Value others above yourselves? That's not how our system works. But it's what Paul encouraged us to do. What a world this would be if that was our life verse.